Sabah al-khair. Right now I want to talk with you about a structure called Tamyiiz, which means something like specification in Arabic, and how we can use it to convey more sophisticated superlative and comparative ideas. I'm assuming that you know how simple superlatives and comparatives work in Arabic and that you're familiar with the shift in vowel that happens. We get a lot of adjectives from this fa'il pattern, like kabir, latif, gharib, and then to make them comparative or superlative, we can just put them into this af'al pattern. Kabir, akbar, bigger or biggest. Latif, even more nice, even nicer, altaf. Gharib, aghrab, the very strangest. The issue arises though when we try to use other adjectives, ones that don't fit into those 3 or 4 letter patterns, and we want to make them comparative or superlative. Adjectives like muzdahim, which means crowded, or muntashir, which means widespread. How are we going to take that word and put it into the af'al pattern? Well, the answer is we can't really, because too much information is tied up in that specific pattern. We can't just change the pattern. Typically, when we're going to use tamyiz for a structure like this, we're working with an adjective that's derived from a verb pattern that isn't form 1, right? Forms 2 through 10. Don't overcomplicate things. If that's overcomplicating it, you don't need to think about it too much. But we have a slightly different multi-step process for taking a word like muzdahim for crowded and saying more crowded or the most crowded. Here's what we need to do. 1, we need to figure out the verb that this adjective comes from. Most words in Arabic are associated with or related to a specific verb. So in this case, if we look at it and maybe go to our dictionary, we can figure out that it's a form 8 verb, and that the verb form in the past tense, conjugated for huwa, is dahama. The dal is actually a stand-in for a ta, so that's a little bit irregular, but it shouldn't throw us off too much. Now, we need to take that verb and move it into its masdar form. Put it into its masdar, which for a form 8 verb is super regular. We can just add an alif between the last 2 letters and we get izdiham. Finally, we take that masdar form of this verb that was derived from the adjective and we make it mansub. We keep it indefinite, but we make it mansub with tanween. Izdihaman. And then we can put in a sentence along with a helping af'al pattern. So let's take an actual example, make it less abstract. If we wanted to say, Cairo is more crowded than Casablanca, we would do this. Al-Qahira. And now I want to say it's more crowded. Here we have izdiham, crowdedness, and izdihaman in the mansub, meaning sort of like crowdedly or in terms of crowdedness. So we can say Al-Qahira akthar izdihaman. Oops, I forgot the dad there. Izdihaman min الدار البيضاء. So we've used akthar here to give the idea of more, and then we've used izdihaman to specify what kind of more we mean, right? More crowded, more in terms of crowdedness than Casablanca. Let's take another example. I saw an unfortunate headline in an Arabic news website the other day that said fake news is more widespread than real news, using a version of this adjective, muntashir. Muntashir means widespread, but we want to say more widespread. So again, I need to figure out what the verb is. In this case, it's also a form 8 verb. Intashara. Past tense, conjugated for huwa. Now I need to put it into its masdar form, which again is just going to be adding an alif at the end. Intishar. And 3 for space. I'm not going to draw this one out. I need to add that mansoob ending while keeping it while keeping it indefinite, and then I can put it into my sentence. What did it say? الأخبار الكاذبة أكثر انتشارا من الصحيحة. Lying news is more widespread than true news, where again we're using أكثر to say more, and then انتشارا to specify لنميز what kind of more widespread, more spreadedly, if you will. Sometimes it helps me to think of it that way using an awkward English grammar. If that works for you, great. If not, don't even worry about it. Sometimes, in order to have a more coherent sentence that has more information at the end, we need to add information after the tamyiz. For example, if we wanted to express that Saudi Arabia is the biggest producer of oil in the Arab world, or the largest Arab nation in terms of production of oil, we could also use tamyiz and say something like السعودية أكبر دولة عربية So the biggest Arab nation, and now I want to say in terms of production of oil. Produce, or producer, let's say, producing is muntij, and it's a form 4 verb that it's derived from. Antaja. And we might know that from the vowel pattern here. If not, we would have to go and look it up. This can be a process that takes a little bit of time, especially when we're getting it under our belts. So, muntij, antaja is our verb, and the masdar is intaj. So what I'm going to do is make it mansoob, and then I'm almost done. Intajan. So, the largest Arab nation in terms of production, intajan. Now I want to say in terms of production of oil. With a phrase like production of oil, you might be thinking, oh, okay, X of Y, we might be able to use an idafa here. However, because this needs to be truly indefinite, we can't use an idafa. So in order to create that subordinate possessive of kind of meaning, we need to use the helping particle li. If we wanted to say something like in terms of production of oil. Intajan linft. Another example, if we wanted to say Sarah loves sports most among all her siblings, we could say something like Sarah أكثر إخوتها in terms of love of sports is what we want to do. Now we probably know the word for love. We don't need a masdar every single time. We can also use regular nouns, although hub happens to be the masdar of verbs for love, right? It's a normal-ish word, so we could just say hubban in terms of love of sports, but once again, we've got that tamyiz, it needs to be indefinite, so we use the li to connect it to the word that follows. Hubban lirriyada, in terms of love of sports. Notice that a lot of these sentences we really would just need to rephrase in English. It's difficult often to take the word order in Arabic when we're using a tamyiz construction like this and retain it in English. It can sound pretty awkward. So when we're thinking back and forth, we need to recognize that fact and not be slaves to the syntax or word order or exact phraseology of one thing or the other. Some things just work better in one language and don't work that well in another. One other case I want to talk about is sometimes when we're using a word in Tamyiiz and the verb that we're working with has a particle, has a preposition that belongs to it, then we keep that preposition and that obviates the need for the li that we've used here. Antaja and ahab don't tend to have a preposition between them and their objects, so we needed that helping li. But suppose we wanted to say, he was more pleased with the museum than I was. So that verb for pleasing and being pleased with something typically takes the preposition be. So I'll spare you the trouble of going through those steps, except to say that the masdar in mansub would be i'jaban bi. So I want to say he was more than me, or you know what, let's make it less since we haven't said that yet. He was less pleased with the museum than I was. كان أقل, opposite of أكثر, أقل, he was less pleasedly, less pleased. بالمتحف مني. So he was less pleasedly about the museum than I was. There we would retain that bi because it's just the preposition that must, in most cases, follow that verb from which we get our masdar. One final note is that we can in fact use this tamyiz and a helping af'al pattern to express comparatives or superlatives even with adjectives that normally fit into the af'al pattern. That's one way to do it, but it's not something that we are bound to by any means. And sometimes we want the extra Arabic rhetorical flavor of this structure in our own writing or formal speaking. So, for example, if we want to say, the dog is nicer than the cat. That's not a statement I'm making, it's just an example sentence that I want to use. We could say, الكلب ألطف من القطة. Normal superlative pattern, ألطف min, fine, no big deal. But we could also say, الكلب أكثر من القطة. لطفاً. The dog is more than the cat in terms of kindness. Or if we wanted to retort that the cat was smarter than the dog, we have a normal adjective, ذكي, that we can put into that af'al pattern, أذكى. So we could say, القطة أذكى من الكلب. Or we could take the masdar of that verb for being smart, that noun that sort of means intelligence or being intelligent, and say القطة أكثر من الكلب ذكاءً. The cat is more than the dog in terms of smartness, in terms of intelligence. It's a choice that we can make, and it has pretty much no difference in meaning, but it is a fun way, if the mood strikes us, to add a certain rhetorical flair. And again, if you, like me, are not a first language speaker of Arabic, this is a nice structure to use when you want to demonstrate your knowledge of structures that aren't very close to the English language, right? We can't really get away with saying this in English using the exact phraseology. It would sound a bit strange, but in Arabic it sounds very elegant and very native. So for that reason alone, I would encourage you to incorporate it into your own speech and writing when possible.